The duffel bag hit my hip on every third step, and the strap kept sliding. I had fixed the buckle housing with cargo tape at 2 in the morning in the belly of a transit shuttle, on the floor of the cargo hold because the passenger section was full, and I had bought an overflow ticket, applying 2 overlapping strips of gray tape by feel because the light down there was doing something unreliable. I tested the hold 3 times before I trusted it. The strap had held for 14 hours across 3 transfer points without failure. It was going to keep holding, but I could feel it every time it shifted, and I kept resetting it. And that was the rhythm of my arrival at Corvus 9, push the strap up, take 20 steps, push it up again, take 20 more. The station did not introduce itself gradually. It replaced the horizon entirely. One moment I was walking through the dock corridor with the normal sense of a ceiling somewhere above me, and then the dock opened and Corvus 9 was simply there, every direction, every angle, filling the visual field the way a mountain fills it when you are already at the base and looking up. The concept of edges stopped applying. The concept of sky stopped applying. There was only the station, and the understanding that whatever scale I had brought with me was no longer useful here. I had a transport number. I had a credential chip. I had an enrollment letter from the Vethkaran Unified Military Academy with a seal I had memorized and a registration number I could recite in my sleep, and I had read that letter 43 times over the course of the transit, because reading it was better than running the math on everything that could go wrong between the shuttle ramp and the gate. 43 times. Not from worry exactly. From the specific habit of a person who knows that occupied hands and occupied eyes keep the bad arithmetic from running on its own. There were 11 humans enrolled at Corvus 9. I had spent 3 years working to become the 12th. The admissions line stretched from the outer dock bay to the main arch, 50 beings deep, maybe more, a cross-section of galactic compact species that represented most of the member roster and a few I could not immediately identify. The line moved in the rhythm that every bureaucratic system in every civilization runs on. Credentials out, chip scanned, brief confirmation, move through. I had been in lines like this since I was old enough to travel, on 4 planets and 9 stations, and the rhythm had always been the same. You showed what you had. You were allowed through. The deal was simple and the deal was reliable. I had what I needed. The deal was the deal. The gate itself was obsidian. Actual polished stone, not composite material designed to approximate it, real stone, cut from somewhere and shaped into a 60-foot arch that the station's interior lighting hit from shifting angles, making the surface look different depending on where you stood. On direct approach, it was a dark mirror. From the side, it was something closer to fire that had been stopped mid-motion and turned permanent. Around the base of the arch, carved into a separate circular plaque that wrapped the full circumference, were the lineage crests of 63 founding species of the Galactic Compact. Symbols I had spent 3 weeks before departure memorizing, placement, design, species name in 3 languages each. I found the human crest on my second pass. It took a second pass because it was smaller than the others, not by a dramatic margin, not by a margin that announced itself as an insult, just smaller, the way something gets smaller when it is added to a composition already complete and the available space has already been distributed. And the engraving was lighter than the stone around it. The color had not yet darkened with age the way the other 62 crests had darkened over decades of installation. Humans had been formally admitted to the Compact's Academy enrollment 8 months ago. The plaque did not hide the timeline. It showed it in the color difference plainly to anyone paying attention. I adjusted my strap and kept moving forward. 3 beings from the scanner, then 2. The being directly ahead of me, tall, narrow, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and had no patience for anyone who had not stepped up, chipped in, and moved through without hesitation. I stepped forward. Drevek Salyun stepped in front of me. He had been standing to the left of the gate attendant post, not in line, not in any gate role, not wearing any assignment marker that placed him at this location for any official reason. Just standing, in the way that something very large stands when it has decided that a location belongs to it by the simple fact of its occupation. Vethkuran averaged 9 feet in height and were built the way load-bearing walls were built, broad-chested, thick-framed, dense in the specific way that made the physics of the space around them feel different. Drevak was not physically exceptional for his species. He was simply large in the way that changed the geometry of a corridor, that made other beings seem like they were in slightly the wrong position just by being within 10 feet of him. He turned from where he had been standing and placed himself directly between me and the scanner. Not a shuffle, not a misdirection, not the kind of wrong-turn collision that happened in congested spaces when too many bodies occupied the same channel of movement. He turned and he stepped, and the motion had the specific, clean quality of intention, the movement of someone who had decided to do a thing and was doing it. His secondary appendage, the broad, flat limb that Vethkuran used for carrying and blocking with equal ease, extended to roughly my chest height, not touching me, just present. Just occupying the space that had been, 4 seconds ago, the space I was walking into. I stopped. The cadet behind me corrected fast. I heard the shuffle of the redirect, heard a brief sound from them that my translator declined to process, which usually meant something short and unflattering. The line split around me without ceremony, the way water splits around a stopped object smoothly, with the full indifference of a current that has its own destination and is not interested in obstacles. People moved around me. Some looked. Most kept walking and did not. I held out my credentials, the chip and the letter open and flat in my hand. Drevak took them from me without scanning them. He held them at a slight angle at the particular elevation and tilt of a casual assessment, the specific posture of someone who has already made a determination about something and is performing the appearance of evaluating it for the benefit of anyone watching. He turned the letter over once, looked at the seal, turned it back, then held it again at that angle, positioned so that anyone in the corridor had a clear sightline to it, held the way you hold something whose value you are in the process of publicly establishing. He did not look at me while he held it. I watched him work. I had been practicing what I was doing right now for 13 years. Not the standing still, that was just physics, the decision to keep weight distributed and feet planted. The other part, the part that required actual practice, the part where you hold your face level and your shoulders down and your hands open and your eyes clear and your voice, when you used it, flat as pavement. The part where you do not give the thing in front of you the reaction it has designed the entire production to receive. I had been practicing that since I was 9 years old, in a neighborhood where that skill was not a social grace but a practical survival tool, and in a family where it had been passed down with the same consistency as jaw structure and the tendency to burn rather than tan. My father had it. His father had it before him. There were things that moved through a family the way genetics moved, the things that were never discussed because they were too necessary to be discussed. We pass down the particular stillness of a person who has learned, thoroughly, how not to give a performance what it wants. I did not move. The line kept flowing around me. My strap slid off my shoulder. I reset it. 15 meters back, near the inner arch of the gate, Subcommander Irv stood with both upper limbs clasped behind his back. Irathi ran narrow and precise, 6-limbed, small-framed, with the kind of posture that looked less like a natural state and more like a calculated placement, as though every angle of every limb had been measured and positioned to convey something specific. His uniform carried rank designation at the collar and both lower cuffs. I had first noticed him when I was 4 beings from the front of the line, and he had been in that same position since. He was watching. He had not moved toward me. I noted it. I filed it under things that were true and not yet useful. I set it aside. The scanner sat 3 feet to my right, operational, unoccupied, ready to perform the function it had been installed to perform. Drevek held my papers the way you hold something you have already decided is trash. I waited. I had always been very good at waiting, and something about the particular quality of Drevek's patience, the kind that was not actually patience but was performance extended in front of an audience, told me the waiting was not close to being over. I settled my strap one more time and kept my face exactly where it was. I started paying very careful attention to everything in the corridor. The crowd assembled in stages. First, it was the cadets whose paths brought them through this section of corridor naturally, slowing because the foot traffic had kinked around me, and the slowdown registered as a question in the body language of anyone approaching from behind. Then it was the cadets who slowed because they saw others slowing, and slowing became stopping, and stopping became watching. Then it was the ones far enough back to see the whole shape of the situation before they arrived, who understood what kind of scene they were walking into and made the decision, consciously or not, to stay and see how it resolved. 40 beings, then more than I could count without turning my head, and I was not going to turn my head. Drevek noticed the crowd forming before I finished counting its edges. I could tell by the slight shift in his posture, not a dramatic reorientation, just the specific adjustment of a performer who has heard the house filling and is calibrating his register accordingly. He waited for it the way a speaker waits for an audience to settle, and then he started talking. His voice dropped into the lower frequency register that Vethkaran used for formal address, a resonance that hit the chest before the ears, that my translator processed with a half-second lag, so I heard the authority of it before I understood the words. He was not speaking to me. He was speaking in my direction, with my enrollment letter visible in his secondary appendage, with me as the visual context for the argument he was constructing for the corridor at large. The Vethkaran Unified Military Academy, he said, had stood for 300 years. 300 years of enrollment standards that had not bent for political agreements, that had not softened when diplomatic relationships required demonstrations of goodwill, that had not been revised downward to accommodate species whose military contribution to the compact was still being written. The Academy's reputation was not decorative history. It was the demonstrated outcome of a standard that demanded something specific from every being who walked through that gate, and that accepted nothing less than what it demanded. 9 of the last 12 compact defensive operations had been commanded by officers who trained here. That number did not happen by accident. He held my enrollment letter slightly higher. The compact's human enrollment agreement, he said, used very specific language. He cited the clause, provisional enrollment pending demonstrated merit, not full enrollment, not the same classification as the being standing in this corridor with him. Provisional, which was, if you read the agreement text with attention rather than optimism, an honest description of what had been extended, a courtesy classification, granted by political arrangement, dressed in the vocabulary of merit. He let that settle across the corridor. The crowd was quiet in the way crowds go quiet when a large number of individuals are all making the same decision to listen, rather than speak. I looked at him, I kept my face level, I gave him nothing. I had listened to the argument carefully, because it was not a stupid argument and stupid arguments were not what was standing in front of me. The stupid version would have been easier to hold. The stupid version, crude, personal, the blunt instrument of simple hostility, would have been legible to anyone watching, and would have cost him something with the more thoughtful part of his audience. What he was doing instead was citing real policy language from a real diplomatic agreement. The debates he was referencing had happened in actual compact sessions, with recorded votes and formal dissenting statements from delegates who had made exactly this case. He was not manufacturing the concern. He was giving voice to a position that had a documented constituency and a supporting body of argument. He was wrong, but he was wrong in the complex way, the way that took work to address, the way that had been dressed in enough accuracy to resist a simple dismissal. I was tracking all of it. I was also thinking about my cargo tape. The strap had shifted again. I had reset it. I was aware of the two overlapping strips of gray tape on the underside of the buckle housing, applied in the cargo hold at 2 in the morning with insufficient light, 2 strips for redundancy, each tested 3 times before I trusted the hold. 14 hours without failure. There was no reasonable reason for me to be thinking about cargo tape right now, with 50 beings filling the corridor behind me, and my enrollment letter in someone else's secondary appendage. I was thinking about it anyway. I thought about the quality of attention required to do a repair job in inadequate light, in a rattling cargo hold, with fingers cold from the recycled bay air, and a roll of tape nearly used up that had to be handled carefully, or it would fold back on itself. I thought about testing the hold 3 times. I thought about carrying the bag through every transfer point across 14 hours and checking the repair each time because I had fixed what was broken, and I was not going to let it fail from inattention. I fixed things that broke. I carried them anyway. That was a thing I had learned from watching my father fix things and carry them anyway, and from watching his particular expression when he did it, not pride exactly, something quieter than pride, something that had been worn smooth by repetition until it was more like practice than feeling. Drevek had finished talking. The corridor was very quiet. I looked at him. "Are you going to scan my credentials?" I said, "or not?" 6 words. No interrogative rise at the end. The period did the work that tone would have done if I had been interested in giving him tone. 1 full second of nothing. Nothing in the corridor moved except the ambient ventilation cycling through its normal rhythm. And then Drevek laughed. Vethkaran laughter was percussive, a brief rhythmic compression of the chest cavity that my translator classified as vocal affirmation, casual register. It was not theatrical mockery. It was something more specific than that. It was the sound of someone who had delivered a 3-minute formal argument about the structural integrity of a 300-year institution and received 6 procedural words in response, and found the scale mismatch genuinely amusing. He had expected something larger. He had received something very small. The disproportion was, apparently, funny. He looked at the crowd when he laughed. That was the part I filed away carefully. He looked at the crowd, not at me. I was the visual aid. The crowd was the audience. The laugh was for them. And some of the crowd responded. Not all of it, not even a majority, but enough. A sound moved through the left side of the corridor, through the cluster of Vethkaran third-years who had been watching with the ease of a familiar experience, through a few others near the back whose body language shifted into the alignment of people who had decided which interpretation of the situation was correct. To the far right edge of the crowd stood a human cadet, younger than me, first year at a guess, with the particular quality of attention of someone doing a calculation rather than watching a performance. He was not watching Drevek. He had not been watching Drevek. He was watching Subcommander Irv, had been watching him since before the crowd fully formed, and when the laughter moved through the left side of the corridor he glanced at me once and then returned his eyes to Irv. I checked Irv. He had moved. Not much, not enough to constitute an intervention, not enough to be called a step toward me with any authority. 3 meters closer than his original position. 12 meters now instead of 15. Still clasped, still precise, still watching me with the kind of attention that was adding something up column by column. My credentials were still in Drevak's secondary appendage at the angle of low value. The scanner was 3 feet to my right. Drevek said something else then, a lower register phrase that the translator gave me as approximately, a demonstration of the point in practice. He gestured at me slightly, at the general fact of me standing here, 6 words and no expression, and a strap held together with cargo tape. He was using my composure as evidence for his argument. The fact that I had not yet responded was being presented as confirmation that there was nothing adequate to respond with. He was performing my stillness back at me. I pulled my strap up. I held my feet where they were. I kept my face exactly level and waited for whatever he was going to do next, because the crowd had a shape now and the shape was expecting a conclusion, and conclusions required a final movement. I was not going to give him the one he was counting on. The first time Drevak moved toward me directly, it was a small movement, not a full step, a shift in weight, a lean, a deliberate redistribution of his physical presence in the air between us. Vethkaran used their scale the way certain negotiators used silence, as a resource to be deployed at the precise moment when it would have the most effect on the being it was deployed against. I had read about the tactic in the species documentation. I had understood it the way you understand things from documentation. Now, I understood it the way you understand things from the inside of them. He was not going to wait indefinitely. The crowd had been standing for 10 minutes and crowds had limited patience for scenes that did not move toward resolution. He had given the argument. He had received the laugh. Now the scene needed its conclusion. I set my feet slightly wider than they had been. He noticed. Something shifted in the quality of his attention, not surprise, not concern, something more interested than either. A recalibration. He looked at my feet. Then he looked at my face. Then he returned his gaze to the crowd with the easy manner of someone who was not troubled by what he had seen. He addressed the crowd again. I was not tracking the specific content of it anymore. I was tracking the function, filling time, maintaining the audience's orientation toward him, establishing the procedural framing for what he was about to do. He was building a record. He cited the Academy's provisional enrollment clause a second time. He referenced the authority of senior cadets to direct provisional enrollees during gate entry. He was making the legal structure of the next action visible to everyone watching before he performed the action. He was thorough. I had to give him that. I kept my feet where they were. The young human cadet at the far right edge of the crowd, the one watching Irv, had shifted his attention fully to me. The calculation in his expression had resolved into something else. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who has been watching a situation develop and has identified the point where the development becomes something different. Irv was at 10 meters. I had not seen the step that closed the distance. I had checked him, looked away, and when I looked back the gap had closed by 1 meter. His upper limbs were no longer clasped behind his back. Both arms were at his sides. I noted it. I held my face forward and did not let the notation change anything visible. 10 meters, arms at sides, watching. Drevak finished his framing remarks and turned back to me. The expression on his face had the settled quality of a person who has done the preparatory work and is ready for the consequent step. He looked at my feet and the position I had taken, and then he looked at my face, and whatever he saw in it did not concern him, which told me something about the limits of his experience with the specific kind of face I was wearing. He reached out with his secondary appendage. He placed it on my shoulder. Not forcefully. That is the precise and important thing about it, not hard, not aggressive, nothing that would register as a strike on any security feed in this corridor. A placement, a direction. In Vethkaran physical communication, the gesture translated as, "You may proceed in the direction indicated." His appendage was indicating the direction behind me. Back down the corridor, away from the scanner, away from the gate, back to the dock. Technically within conduct codes, that was the structure of it. He had built the framing. He had cited the authority. This was the procedural execution. It landed on my shoulder. I went still. Not the managed, practiced, deliberate stillness I had been holding for the last 20 minutes. Something different. The stillness that lives on the other side of composure, the place you arrive at when something crosses a line and the body stops performing anything at all and simply becomes what it is. I had been in that place before. Not often. Enough times to know it on arrival. The corridor sharpened. Not in the way that panic sharpens things. Not that wired, wide-open quality of too much information coming in too fast. The other kind of sharpening. Everything at a finer resolution. The ventilation cycle. The weight of my bag and the cargo tape and the floor under my feet. The specific weight and temperature and placement of Drevak's secondary appendage on my shoulder. I was thrown back 5 years. Not images, not sounds, just the shape of a feeling, the precise emotional coordinate of a specific kind of contact at a specific point in my life. And then I was back on Corvus 9 and Drevak's hand was on my shoulder and 50 beings were watching. Anger came in then. Not the loud kind, not the kind that fills a room and changes the temperature of the air. The other kind, the kind that came in clean and level and familiar, the kind that had always worked more like a tool than an emotion, the thing I reached for when I needed something to hold me upright, when the alternative was something less controlled and less useful. It was a known thing. It was, in the specific internal economy of my life, a resource. Sweet in the particular way that reliable things are sweet, not pleasant, just dependable. I was very aware in that moment of the difference between the anger and the action. They were not the same. The anger kept me level. The action would be a separate decision, made clearly with full awareness. Drevak's appendage was still on my shoulder, still directing, still completely certain of its own authority in this specific gesture. I looked at my bag. My duffel bag, gray canvas, one main compartment, 2 side pockets, serial number on the interior label, the broken strap with the cargo tape repair, 2 overlapping strips of gray tape over the buckle housing, applied in a cargo hold at 2 in the morning, tested 3 times before trusting. I held it for 1 second. 2. I set it down. Not gently. The bag hit the floor of Corvus 9 with a sound that moved through the corridor the way a dropped object moves through a room where nobody had been expecting a dropped object, not dramatic, not loud, but landing in the silence with the specific quality of a statement. Something had changed in the room. The floor knew it. The crowd knew it a half-second later. The corridor went quiet in a way it had not been quiet before. Not the managed quiet of an audience holding its attention. Something else. The texture of a room processing a shift that had happened faster than the room's collective understanding could account for. Drevak's secondary appendage was still on my shoulder. I looked at it. I looked at his face. I let him see what was in my eyes without explaining it to him. Then I reached up with one hand and I moved his appendage off my shoulder. Not fast, not hard. I lifted it away from contact and returned it to the neutral space between us, the way you return a misplaced object to its correct position, without ceremony, without commentary, with the complete absence of emotion that is its own kind of statement. He stared at me. The crowd had gone completely still. Irv was at 9 meters. I did not look at him. I looked at Drevak and kept my face where it was and waited for whatever he was going to do next. He had looked at my feet, and he had looked at my face, and he had decided he was not troubled by what he saw. He had been working with the wrong information. My bag was on the floor behind me. My credentials were in his secondary appendage. The scanner was 3 feet to my right. I had set down the only thing I was carrying that I did not need for what was coming. He moved to remove me physically. I want to be accurate about what happened next. Not generous, not dramatic, not shaped to sound like something larger than what it was. Accurate. Drevak reached for me with his primary appendage, the dominant limb, longer and stronger than the secondary, the one Vethkaran led within any physical directive action. The reach was controlled and deliberate, the grip and redirect motion of someone who had the physical authority to remove a provisional cadet from a gate line and had just decided to exercise it. He had the size for it. He had the institutional backing for it. He had the crowd watching and the conduct code cited and the authority framed and the physical capability to end the scene exactly the way he had planned it. He had everything except an accurate understanding of what he was reaching for. The grip landed. I did not resist it. That is the first thing, and it is the most important thing, and it is the thing that the crowd did not understand immediately. I did not pull back. I did not brace. I did not counter the force with opposing force, which is what the crowd expected, because opposing force against a Vethkaran at 9 feet and the corresponding mass was a specific kind of math that ended in one direction. I did not resist the grip. I used it. His mass was a geometry. The direction of his force was a direction I could work with rather than work against. My left hand came up inside the angle of his reach, not to block, but to redirect a small motion, precise, applied at the joint where the leverage lived. My right hand found the secondary contact point that his momentum had created when he committed to the reach. I gave him a quarter turn of his own weight. That was all it took. A quarter turn, borrowed from the force he had already committed, redirected through the geometry of his own momentum. Something I had practiced on a mat in a gym in Chicago with a coach who had spent 6 years studying every publicly documented Vethkaran joint structure and loading pattern, and had built a 2-week module around the single question of, if you are a human female of average build and a Vethkaran decides to physically remove you, what does the physics actually offer you? The physics offered exactly this. Drevek went off balance. The crowd inhaled. That was the sound, not a shout, not a response, not the noise of an audience reacting to a spectacle. An inhale. The involuntary biological response of 50 beings simultaneously processing something that had contradicted their predictive model. The scene was supposed to end one way. It was ending a different way. The body processes that before the mind does. I did not put him down hard. I want to be very clear about that. I had the geometry for a hard landing. I had the angle and his weight and his off-balance momentum and a clear floor, and all the physical conditions required to put a 9-foot Vethkaran down in a way that would have been visible and final and unambiguous. I had all of it. I used about a third of it. I put him down controlled, measured, the specific amount of force required to complete the movement and no more, a landing that was firm enough to be real and gentle enough that nothing in his body absorbed anything it could not absorb without injury. Not gentle in the way of mercy, exactly, more in the way of precision. I had calculated the amount of force needed, and I had used that amount and not exceeded it in real time, on a species I had never physically encountered outside of a training module, in an environment I had never practiced in front of an audience I had not chosen. Drevek was on the floor of Corvith 9. He was physically fine. That was the part that broke the room. Not that he was down. That he was down and uninjured, and I was standing above him with a completely level face, and the difference between those two outcomes, the outcome that had happened and the outcome that could have happened, was a decision I had made in real time and was visibly the decision I had made. That was the thing that nobody in that corridor had a framework for. I was not rageful. I was not shaking. I was not breathing hard or flushed or displaying any of the physiological markers that violence was supposed to produce in the being who had just performed it. I was standing with my weight evenly distributed, and my face arranged in the same expression it had held for the last 30 minutes, and my heart rate was elevated but not dramatically so, and my hands were open at my sides. I had not lost control. I had not found a limit and broken through it. I had made a series of calibrated decisions under stress with incomplete information about the specific body I was working with, and I had executed those decisions with the precision that 3 years of academy track training and a lifetime of understanding that the world was not going to forgive me for being imprecise had built into me. I bent down and picked up my duffel bag. I adjusted the strap. The cargo tape held. I looked at the scanner. 3 feet to my right, operational, unoccupied. I looked at Irv. He was at 6 meters. He had crossed 3 meters at some point during the 4 seconds of the confrontation, and I had not tracked the movement, but he was at 6 meters now, and he was looking at me, and his face had the expression of a person who has just received information that confirmed something he had already suspected, and is in the process of deciding what to do with the confirmation. He looked at his hands, he looked back at me. His hands had gone very still. Around us, in the corridor, not one of the 50 beings was making a sound. Not the Vethkaran third years to the left. Not the mixed cluster in the back. Not the young human cadet at the right edge who had stopped watching Irv and was now watching me with an expression that had moved past calculation into something else. Drevak was on the floor, completely physically unharmed, looking at the ceiling of Corvus 9 with the expression of someone processing a new fact about the world. 37 species in that corridor. Not one of them was breathing. Irv moved first. He walked toward me at the pace of someone who has made a decision and is executing it without theater. Not fast, not slow, the pace of formal purpose. He stopped at a distance of 2 meters, which in Arathi protocol was the distance of official address, and he stood with his arms at his sides and his chin level, and he looked at me with the particular expression of someone who is about to do something precise. He looked at Drevak. Then he looked at the crowd. Then he looked at me. "Cadet Reyes," he said. It was the first time anyone had used my name in this corridor. I want to be accurate about what that did to me, and I want to be equally accurate about the fact that I did not let it do anything visible. "Sub-Commander," I said. He reached into the inner pocket of his uniform and produced a small data card, which he held out to me at the formal presentation angle, the specific position of official documentation in Arathi protocol, offered rather than displayed, requiring my active acceptance. I took it. "That is a formal record of a conduct code obstruction," he said, "filed under Academy Statute 7, Section 14, subsection C, which covers the deliberate impediment of an enrolled cadet's access to Academy facilities by a non-designated individual. The obstruction began at the moment your credentials were removed from the scanning queue without authorization. The record documents the full timeline." He had been measuring time since I stepped to the scanner. He had a timestamp on the moment Drevak took my credentials from my hand. He had been waiting to use this. He had been standing 15 meters away with his arms clasped behind his back, and a conduct code citation already prepared in his inner pocket, waiting to see if the situation reached the threshold that justified deploying it. And the threshold was not the moment the crowd formed, or the moment Drevak gave his speech, or the moment my credentials were held at the angle of low value in front of 50 witnesses. The threshold was something more specific. I had a reasonable idea of what the threshold had been. "The obstruction is documented," Irv continued, "as an unauthorized action by a third-year cadet in the absence of any assigned gate authority. Cadet Salyun was not assigned to this gate today. His presence here was not sanctioned. His handling of your enrollment documentation was not sanctioned. The conduct code violation is clear and has been registered with the Academy's official record system as of 2 minutes ago." He paused. "This citation will become part of Cadet Salyun's permanent Academy record," he said, "and will be reviewed by the Conduct Council at the next scheduled session." Drevak had gotten himself up off the floor by this point. He was standing at the edge of the corridor with 2 of his Vethkaran third-year colleagues close to him, one of whom appeared to be saying something to him in a low register I could not translate from this distance. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Irv with the expression of someone doing a rapid recalculation. Irv turned back to face me. "I owe you a formal apology on behalf of this institution," he said. I looked at him. "The Academy's enrollment process guarantees unobstructed access to the gate and scanner for all enrolled cadets," he said. "That guarantee was not upheld in your case today. The failure was institutional and the apology is institutional." He paused with the precision of someone who has rehearsed the distinction. "I am not apologizing for Cadet Salyun. I am apologizing to you. There is a difference." I understood the difference. I stood with it for a moment. The crowd had not dispersed. 50 beings were still standing in the corridor, and the corridor had not returned to its previous air, the air of routine movement, of lines and credentials and the bureaucratic heartbeat. The air was different now. Something had happened here that the corridor was still processing, and the processing was going to take longer than the 5 minutes it would take the foot traffic to resume. I accept the apology, I said, because it was the right response to a correctly framed institutional statement, and because Irv had done it correctly, and I was not interested in punishing precision. He nodded once, the single nod of a formal acknowledgement received. Then he reached out with his right upper limb, the dominant one at the elevation of an offered credential, and he held out my enrollment papers. The chip, the letter, both items at the correct angle, held in the way you hold something you are returning to its rightful owner. I took them from him. He turned to the gate scanner. He held out one upper limb and activated the scanning console himself, turning the interface toward me, the screen lit and ready and waiting for input. "Your chip, please," he said. I held my credential chip to the scanner. The scanner beeped once, clean and clear, the same sound it had made for every being in this line today. On the screen, my enrollment information populated in 3 columns: name, registration number, cadet classification. My classification read, enrolled full standing, not provisional, enrolled. I had read my enrollment letter 43 times, and I had still not caught that they had upgraded my classification 2 weeks ago. Apparently someone in the admissions office had revised the language. Irv read the screen. Something in the set of his expression shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a calculation shifts when a new value replaces an estimated one. "Full enrollment," he said, not to me, to the corridor. And then he said, "Cadet Reyes is not a provisional enrollee. She is a full-standing enrolled cadet of the Vethkaran Unified Military Academy, and she has been since the date of her acceptance letter." I filed that away. I was going to think about it later, in detail, in a quiet room. Right now I was standing in a corridor with 50 beings, and a conduct code citation in my hand, and a scanner that had just confirmed everything I had always known was on my credential chip. The gate opened. The actual gate, the obsidian arch and the inner door that sat behind it, the entryway into the academy proper. The sound of it opening was deep and mechanical and familiar in the way that doors are familiar, the sound of a threshold being crossed. I bent down and picked up my duffel bag. I slung the strap over my shoulder. The cargo tape held without any drama at all, the way things hold when they have been fixed correctly and tested and trusted. I walked toward the gate. I did not look at Drevak. Not because I was being tactical about it, I simply had nothing to say to him and no interest in the expression he was currently wearing. The scene was over. I was walking through the gate. Those were the 2 relevant facts. I was 2 steps from the threshold when I heard a second set of footsteps behind me. I did not slow down. I kept walking. But I was aware of the footsteps, the pace of them, the deliberate quality, someone choosing to walk in the same direction I was walking at roughly the same speed, close enough to make the choice clear but not so close as to demand acknowledgement. I walked through the gate. The footsteps followed through. I stopped just inside the arch, in the high-ceilinged entry corridor of the academy proper, and I turned around. The young human cadet, first year, younger than me, with the expression of someone who has just watched something happen and has finished processing it. He was carrying a standard academy issue bag, both straps secured, no modifications necessary. He stopped when I stopped and looked at me with the calm, direct quality of a person who is not embarrassed about having followed. "Owen," he said, his name just that offered straight. "Maya," I said. He nodded. He looked back through the gate at the corridor behind us, at the crowd that was slowly dispersing now, at Irv, who was already speaking to two other staff members, at Drevak, who was standing with the specific stillness of a person who has just understood the shape of what their afternoon has become. "I've been here 6 months," Owen said, still looking back, "and I've been watching that gate every time I pass it." "Watching for what?" I said. He looked at me. "I wasn't sure," he said, "until about 4 minutes ago." I held his gaze for a moment. I adjusted my strap. "Come on," I said. We walked. The corridor of Corvus Nine's interior stretched ahead of us, wide, high, carved from the same dark stone as the outer gate, but lit differently here, warmer, with the ambient light of a space built to be inhabited rather than processed through. The sounds of the academy came from somewhere ahead. Movement, voices, the low-frequency communications of 30 species going about the organized work of becoming what they had come here to become. I had read my enrollment letter 43 times on a transit shuttle floor. I had fixed my strap with cargo tape at 2 in the morning and carried it here without it failing. I had stood in that corridor for 23 minutes with my face level and my feet planted, and my name on a credential chip that said everything that needed to be said. And I was through the gate now. I was on the other side of it. The gate was behind me and Drevak was behind the gate, and the plaque with the 63 crests was behind the gate, and the lighter engraving, the one that had not yet darkened to match the age of the ones around it, the one that said 8 months, the one that said still new, still proving, was behind the gate. I thought about it for one step. Then I stopped thinking about it. Owen walked beside me. Neither of us said anything for a while. The corridor was long and there were many more corridors after it, and the work that I had come here to do had not yet started. It was about to. It was waiting somewhere ahead of me in the form of classrooms and training halls and people I had not yet met, and standards that were going to demand something specific and not accept anything less. I had been preparing for exactly that for 3 years. The strap held, I kept walking. The gate closed behind me, and I did not look back.